Well, I've heard it kind of described as an imaginative take on some familiar tropes in the Western genre, but I don't feel like I'm retelling the OK Corral. I don't feel like I'm telling another version of Billy the Kid. It's really kind of taking that gunfighter element, but also the affinity that, strangely a lot of us have for samurai and samurai swords. And it kind of combines those into, again, this what if scenario in the Wild West, where it was still very much open to that very aggressive, very like people that were bold enough and lucky enough to survive made their way and made their way successfully.
Hey everyone, and welcome. I am Morgan Giss McDonald, founder CEO of Paper Raven Books. And I have with us today a super special guest who is launching his brand new book. It's the first book in the series of the Samurai Cowboys. And book one is Warriors of the Forgotten Way. Nate Wagner, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is such a fun book. It's fun and it's deep, and there are a lot of really reflective themes kind of going on and action. And so I'm wondering, Nate, if you could kind of introduce us. What's happening when we first dive into Warriors of the Forgotten Way?
Certainly. So we meet our protagonist and our broken hero, if you will, Cade Wilson. He's one of three samurai cowboys and an orphan of the American Civil War. And he's kind of struggling with who he is and what he's become. So he's been trained by this samurai warrior from Japan, and he's become an instrument of death. If you can imagine, that's really kind of the rich history of the samurai in Japan, and honing their skills and just be, training every day to defend and kill for their masters. But with that, he becomes very conscious of his deeds over time. And, he also kind of has his own haunting memories of pain and loss as an orphan. So we kind of see, the kind of beginning of his story arc where he's really trying to kind of figure out who he is. And he's trying to kind of break away from this honor-bound service to his benefactor. His benefactor is a land baron that has assembled kind of this private army to take control of the New Mexico territory before the expansion of the railroad in 1876. So these are dangerous men, and they're imposing their agenda during very dangerous times. And Cade is discovering that the path that he's on, it was hard to get in, but it's also even harder to get out. And that is where we pick up our story.
Perfect. And the setting is really fascinating, right? Because we're in, as you said, 1870, northern New Mexico territory, so really kind of Wild West, but you've brought in this samurai kind of element. I mean, the samurai cowboy is such a cool concept. It's so fun. So like captures your imagination almost instantly. How much of this is like historical fiction? Like how much research did you kind of do on the historical aspects of the book?
So it really kind of, to be 100% honest, I was watching the movie The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. And, I'm sitting there and it kind of romanticizes what was kind of going on around that time. So there was three moments in history that kind of happened within 5 years of each other. And it really kind of became the genesis of the story. So in 1865, the Civil War ends and the big expansion west begins. But in 1868, the exact same thing was going on in Japan. So they're moving to a more centralized government. They're getting away from all centuries of infighting between all these feudal lords. And so basically, you have these armies of samurai warriors that now kind of have nothing to do. They're kind of lost. And then the third thing is in 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad is formed. So now we've connected coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco. And you start seeing this big influx of, culture and immigrants from the East, something that hadn't really been kind of exposed at the time. And so thinking through this kind of from a historical fiction place, it was kind of like, well, what if, these kind of what if scenarios, it was like, well, what if these orphans from the Civil War and these lost soldiers met this samurai warrior, and then they basically kind of found each other and ultimately a new purpose. But then that purpose is still a little, it's a little tainted. It's part of the thing that kind of makes it dangerous and kind of introduces the action aspect of it. And that's what, arguably is what makes it most appealing, I think, as kind of an action-based Western historical fiction novel.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was my next question for you, was kind of like, how would you characterize the book? You know, if people like to read this kind of book, they're going to like the samurai cowboy books.
Okay. Well, I've heard it kind of described as an imaginative take on some familiar tropes in the Western genre, but I don't feel like I'm retelling the OK Corral. I don't feel like I'm telling another version of Billy the Kid. It's really kind of taking that gunfighter element, but also the affinity that, strangely a lot of us have for samurai and samurai swords. And it kind of combines those into, again, this what if scenario in the Wild West where it was still very much open to that very aggressive, very like people that were bold enough and lucky enough to survive made their way and made their way successfully.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got some action. We've got some conflicting interests that happen. We've got these three orphans who have gone from, being orphans to elite soldiers, and then have these kind of essentially one of them has this crisis of conscience. So we have all of these different threads in here, which I think makes the book super compelling, right? Because it's like page turning plot, amazing historical setting, and these characters you really come to identify with, which is a pretty fantastic combination. And we talked, before we sort of hit record, Nate, about the audience. And, you did tell me like it's teenager friendly, right? It's young adult friendly in that there are heavy themes, but nothing explicit. And I think it's reflective for all of us, right? So when we get to see these, I don't want to say coming of age, and we sort of talked about it's not exactly coming of age. It's more intensely reflective than that. But what is your idea of like, who do you hope is reading this book, and maybe what themes do you hope they see in the pages of the book and the characters as they're reading?
Well, I did absolutely, to echo what you said, there are some heavy themes. There is violence, but nothing too explicit. I mean, there are relationships, there are dynamics between men and women. There's even there's some romance. It touches a little bit of everything. So I really wanted it to appeal to a broad audience. It's meant to be fun and entertaining. It's meant to kind of bring back that paperback, type of Louis L'Amour, the Zane Grey, but not necessarily like that old gunslinger standing in the middle of the street, like, oh, the shootout. It's definitely a little bit more visceral than that. And I think that it cuts a little deeper when you bring in that samurai element and just ultimately, when they kind of start getting pitted against each other, because again, as part of this elite group, when you're part of it, that's great. And there's a brotherhood that's formed, but when you try to break out of it, you become kind of the outsider, and then suddenly your interests are conflicted. And when your interests are conflicted with the benefactor, or your benefactor, it's ultimately now you're pitted against your brothers. And so there's, again, some big infighting there. But as far as the themes, I really kind of think about a little bit with my time in the Navy, but samurai, they talk about honor and bound by honor, but honor doesn't necessarily have to come from servitude, and it more comes from within, and kind of it's represented by the choices and the life that you lead. So again, as a Navy veteran, I received an honorable discharge. And so after I was trained and I served, I received that distinction. But not everybody gets that distinction. And it does come with benefits to have that distinction. But it really is based on the choices that you make in the life that you lead while you are in the military. And another big theme, I think, is self-awareness. I think that, people often see in others what they don't see in themselves. And for our protagonist, he's really starting to learn that he's starting to become the monster that he's hated and that he's been running from all these years. He really enjoyed originally in his story arc, you kind of see that he appreciates the respect and, the benefits that come with kind of being one of the three that were chosen to kind of, to be one of the samurai cowboys. Because there was only three swords, and that's given away a little bit, but that's a teaser. But there's a reason why three were chosen. But then he really starts to kind of struggle with his deeds. He's starting to gain a conscience as he gets older. He's starting to kind of see that there's a lot that comes with becoming an instrument of death. It has severe consequences, and it's not satisfying what he's running from. It's not. squashing those haunted memories of pain and loss from his past. In fact, it's just kind of adding to it. And now he's really kind of struggling to break out of that and find love and peace, and to kind of remove himself and maybe even settle down somewhere. But again, it's really hard to break out once you're in, and his past is going to follow him.
So good. If y'all are here and you're listening to us and watching us and you're like, this is my kind of book, good news is you can grab a copy right now. The book is launching. We want to get it out to as many people as we possibly can. You can go to paperravenbooks.com/warriors of the forgotten way, all one word. Even better, there's a link right next to this video. Click the link, it'll take you straight over to Amazon. You can grab the Kindle version and download it for free right now. You can grab the paperback version, other versions of the book if you prefer. But yeah, go ahead and do that right now while you're here, while you're thinking about it. You like action, you like the idea of a samurai cowboy, orphans who become elite warriors and now have consciences to deal with, and wanting a different way of life. I mean, this is all of our favorite elements of the story packed into one book. And it's the first book in a series. So go ahead and dive in. The next books are going to be right on the heels. So you can get into book one right now. Go to paperravenbooks.com/warriors of the forgotten way, or click the link next to this video. And Nate, you kind of mentioned that you served in the Navy, and you have a lot of your own sort of personal story inspired, the writing of this book. I'm curious, what was it like for you to write this book? You had your Navy experience, you've also worked, you have your own career, in marketing and advertising. You're the president and CEO of HealthX, which is a big company. How have all of your experiences sort of found their way into your writing process?
Wow, that's a good question. Might be a long answer. It was the whole thing was a bit cathartic. I'll be honest. It was the COVID lockdown project that was really the catalyst for writing this first book. And I'd never taken a creative writing class in my life. I never even, even though I have spent most of my adult career in marketing and advertising and the art of storytelling and arguably creative storytelling, I had never really kind of applied that to, writing a novel. But I applied some of the same methodologies, a lot of whiteboarding, a lot of post-it notes, a lot of building outlines into scenes that become chapters and a narrative that flows. And I think when I spoke with other friends of mine that have written books, and the common theme that kind of kept coming back up with fiction writers is fiction it requires an overactive imagination. And this superpower is what kind of fuels a story. And the rules and the structure can come later. It's really kind of about just writing, letting that imagination kind of flow, and then really kind of letting it pave the way to becoming the book that it will. And then ultimately, fixing it in the editing process. But that said, I've been trying to model my process and my writing style around storytelling. My struggles with point of view notwithstanding, I want to write stories that excite longtime readers and engage young and otherwise reluctant readers. Like my son, my teenage son, who read it, and the best review I ever had was, "Dad, that was a pretty good book. That was pretty good." So I'll take that. But if I were to be 100% honest, I would love to write stories that, again, excite longtime readers and new readers, but also I want to publish books that people say, that would make a great movie. And be like, oh, yeah, that would make a great movie.
Yeah. I love that. And if you could go back to kind of a younger version of yourself, I don't know. And I don't even know if you were thinking about writing books at that time of your life, but is there anything that you would say to kind of a younger version of Nate?
Take a creative writing class. No. Just kidding. But seriously, knowing me, if I would have tried to take a creative writing class, I probably would have felt too intimidated by the rules and structure to even get started. It was arguably better for me just to kind of charge right in, and again, just allow the imagination to pave the way. And which again is more also along the lines of the advice that I received from all those friends. And if I would change one thing though, and I did have a chance to speak to my younger self, is that I would have started writing fiction earlier. As a consultant and CEO of the Health X Group, it's like, yes, I could get on stage for 45 minutes and talk about, you know, customer and patient experience in healthcare. But I'd much rather be writing fictional stories. And I have tried writing business books. Painful truth, I have 3 books that I've tried writing, and they've gone nowhere, business books, because by the time you're carving a niche and producing your prove it idea, things change so rapidly and overnight, and just kind of leave your book in the wake of irrelevance. But with fiction, fiction is just, it's timeless and it's without boundaries. And when I started writing fiction, it was just so, it was almost effortless. And I really started to want to do it, you know, because as a side hustle, you have to make time for it. And you make time in the mornings and you make time on weekends. And you don't make time for something if or it doesn't feel like you're making time for it if you love it, if it's something that you're enjoying and it becomes a hobby and something that you enjoy. So I wish I would have started earlier. I've forgotten some of the ideas that I had when I was younger. But I still have about a dozen or so starts for future books, and I'm passionate about it and putting that down on paper. And I'm very grateful that my wife and my son have indulged me in this passion.
And yeah, we always have to enroll the people in our lives, in our vision, right? Especially when we start saying, "Oh, I'm going to get up early and write, or I'm going to take some time on Saturday to write." It's like, yeah, bringing them into the idea and letting them read, you know, when you're ready, is good, because then they get excited with you. That's always very fulfilling.
Yes, yes, they've been great. They've been very supportive. I could not have done this without them. They've been my harshest critics, but my best cheerleaders too.
Amazing. Well, guys, go ahead and grab a copy. The Warriors of the Forgotten Way. You can go to paperravenbooks.com/Warriors of the Forgotten Way, or just click the link right next to this video. Takes you over to Amazon. You can grab a Kindle version right now, download it on your e-reader for this weekend, grab a paperback copy, physical copy of the book, whichever you prefer, and go ahead and dive in, because this is book 1 of the Samurai Cowboys series. Nate, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Morgan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Paper Raven and working with you has been really great. Thank you so much for everything that you've done.
Well, thank you. It's definitely been an honor to work with you, and cannot wait to see what happens with the Samurai Cowboys. So you'll go grab a copy, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.